My brothers and sisters, in this gospel, Jesus speaks about, he makes a contrast. He talks about those who are blessed and those who are cursed. And then he says to the ones that are poor and are hungry and weeping and who are struggling, he says that you are blessed. And then he says to the ones who are not poor but rich, and the ones who are not struggling, who are not weeping, he says, you are cursed. So this is very easy to misunderstand what our Lord is saying, because he's not saying just because you're rich, therefore you're bad. And he's not saying just because you're poor, therefore you're good. But this is what people often do. They steal our gospel and use it for social and political ends. And so there are many people who, for example, they use the Marxist way, the communist way of looking at the world. And of course, you know, the communist way is to divide people into two opposite groups. And the one group is good and the other good group is bad. And it is the communists who introduced into the history of the world this idea that just because you're poor, therefore you're good. You're on the right side of history. And it is they who brought into currency the idea that just because you're rich, therefore you're bad and you are on the losing side of history. That is not true, because you know there are many poor people who are also bad. Like if you go into any area where it is poor, and I have lived and ministered in such areas, you go into an area that is poor, you will often find that many murders are committed there. Poor committing murders on poor. And you will find that there's every kind of crime and vice. You can find that amongst the poor. So what the communists are saying is a total lie, but so many people have bought it. And then on the other side of the equation, you can find many rich people, but they are good. They are not, just because they're rich, it doesn't mean they're bad. Like there have been kings that were saints, like King Louis of France, you know. So many other of the European saints were kings or princes, or they were queens or princesses. Our own Saint Elizabeth, she was a queen. So, and she was known for helping the poor. She would herself go and wash the clothes of poor, old, and sick people, and she would feed them. And yet she was a queen. So therefore, we must not buy the lie, my brothers and sisters, that just because you're privileged, therefore you're no good. And just because you're underprivileged, therefore you're good. That's not what Jesus is saying. Like, it doesn't mean just because you're hungry, therefore you're God's favorite and you will be satisfied later at some point. No, Jesus is looking at his disciples, and you will see this more clearly in the same Beatitudes as they are recorded by St. Matthew. Jesus is looking at his own disciples, and he's seeing that many of them, they have voluntarily given up their possessions and given what they had to the poor and to the needy so that they could be more free to follow Christ. And therefore they became poor like Jesus was poor. And Jesus is saying to them, you are poor now because you chose to follow me. And therefore you are blessed because of that poverty. So it's not just any poverty that makes us blessed, my brothers and sisters. It is the poverty that comes from following Christ. And as I said, some people, like the disciples, they of their own free will gave up what they had so that they could follow Christ. And then they became poor, and Jesus said, "You are blessed because you did that." And then he goes and he looks at the other side of the picture and he says, "You that are rich, that's a curse on you because you're going to be hungry." Is he saying just because you're rich, you're no good? No, he's saying if you chose to become rich at the cost of obeying God, then your riches is a curse to you, and you are cursed by your riches. If you are satisfied and full of the best things to eat and drink because you gave up on God, you gave up on right and wrong, you gave up on morality, you gave up on truth, you gave up on justice. If you are well fed because you gave up on the better things, on the greater things, then in your well fed state, you are cursed because that's leading you to hell. If you turn away from God, then you're walking towards hell. If you become rich or satisfied because you turned away from God, then you're walking towards hell. And to walk towards hell is the greatest curse that we can ever bring on ourselves. And so the point is, therefore, my brothers and sisters, point one is you must never let the thinkers of this world steal the gospel, capture the gospel for their own earthly ends. Don't let the communists tell you that the world is divided into white and black, rich and poor, good and bad, oppressor and oppressed. Is a little bit more complicated than that. And so, and don't let them say, even Jesus talks like that. No, Jesus is not talking the nonsense that they're talking, you know. As I said, Jesus is saying, if you're poor because of God, then you're blessed. If you're rich because you let go of God, then you're not blessed. That's what Jesus is saying. And so, point one then is don't let them steal our gospel for their horrible political purposes. Keep the gospel a thing of God, not a thing of man, not a thing of human politics. And the second thing is let us take Jesus seriously when he talks here about the blessings and the curses that we can draw down on ourselves. Let us take seriously that if we lose out in this world because we chose to do the right thing, then we are with God and we are blessed. And if you win in this world because you chose to do the wrong thing, you have drawn a curse upon yourselves. That is what he's talking about. And so he's saying that don't be afraid of the hardships that come, or the losses that come, or the pain that comes from following God, because your happiness is made secure by that very hardship. And don't feel comfortable with the well-being that you experience in this world because you have rejected God. Your future is not secure. Your future is the most insecure thing in the world. And so we want to ask God to help us to make the right choices in this life and to be ready to take the consequences of that choice, of those choices.